Labą dieną, sveikinuosi iš
Good afternoon, and I'm welcoming you from the City Lab, from a unique place, and it is a very unique event, both due to the format of it, during the audience and the surroundings. We're in the City Lab, and today, together with the City Lab, together with the Nordic Council of Ministers, is organizing already not the first event, a thematic event on a topic, which is a climate-friendly community, sustainable mobility. My name is Kristina Gaučė. I've been indeed working in this area for 20 years, so allow me to share my insights. I do not hear all of you, but what this mobility means and when it can be sustainable or non-sustainable, and then moving on to what is in the hands of communities and what we can do ourselves. So apart from me, we're going to have more speakers. We are going to have the chief engineer Anton Nikitin from this municipality, then to be followed by the Swedish Cycling Cities Association representative, Emilis Rensvela, and I believe that we're going to have a well-known person, Eduardas Kriščiūnas, who is a member of various associations for cyclists and for pedestrians in Lithuania. He's also a very pragmatical person, so he may share his insights. I do expect that the fifth presentation is going to be made by somebody from the audience. So if somebody is indeed willing and persevering up until the very end, so we will be able to communicate together. My colleague Maria has also drawn up a list of some challenges, how to make it easier to understand that sustainable mobility is not something from the sky, it's not something new. It's only maybe that there is a knowledge gap which we hope to fill. So it is not that frequent that I have to present myself and then to move on to my presentation. So as I mentioned, today's event is a unique event, and I see the date of the 12th of April. This is the wrong date on my slides, so there is a mistake in the slide. So allow me to start from the very beginning. Just as it is in all the events, I simply cannot forget that I also have an obligation to the world, and I shall not forget all the main fields of knowledge which led me to be interested in this area. And there are indeed experts who describe the concept of mobility, and I'm a very adamant supporter of this discipline, and I do hope that I know something about it. So I feel somewhat humbled when people immediately correlate mobility to cycling or absence or presence of bicycles. So allow me to stress once again to all the audience that I can see or I cannot see behind the screens, allow me to remind you that mobility is the ability to move. And the higher the chance or the larger the list of the options or the possible ways of movement, the more mobile a person is. So if there are a number of operators, then if a person can choose adequately from a different modes of transport, and it is going to be just as safe and just as expensive or just as satisfactory as all the previous one, then we have very good chances of increasing human mobility in that region. So this is one point that I wanted to stress. And the second point, which is just as important, is the overall understanding what the urban planners and what the public transport politicians can do. And these are certain variables that we can modulate and try to change the consumer behavior in way of introducing certain modes of transport or promoting certain modes of transport. We do understand that for a couple of hundreds of years, there are some patterns of travel, which would be the frequency of the travel and the duration of the travel and the costs. So due to the pandemic and due to the sharing options, there are some in-between options. When the virtual mobility was not yet so popular as it is today, when we didn't have so many sharing possibilities, there was a very clear pattern. If there was no car in a family, then the 3% of the household's earnings would go to public transportation. The same holds true for the travel. And now people keep on telling and talking about pandemic, about the different structure of the travel, difference in space and time. And I believe that the frequency of travel hasn't changed. Just as the people were not ready to travel to shuttle for more than 1 hour in a day, this hasn't changed. Especially if people are working more from home, uh, then the travel even has become less frequent. But this tolerance to the duration of the travel hasn't increased. 1 hour is more or less the maximum tolerance for any travel to take. So I do understand that there are some misconceptions that we shall not multiply or we shall not make it more frequent, the travels. We simply have to improve the choices of the people. And then you can cut me short if you feel that I'm repeating myself, but these were the main points that I wanted to emphasize. On this slide, I see Gintautas, I see others. I haven't yet met our numerous audience which are sitting behind the screen. So really, I wonder how much do I have to spend time on the benefits of public transport. So if we're planning all the urban space to fit the cars, then this urban space will be car friendly, but not people friendly. So the urban planning is the key. Unfortunately, for the past 20 years, I see that the planning horizon is a very short-sighted horizon. And they are mainly politicized decisions or the politicians who change places and we're reinventing the wheel every 4 years with a change of government or those in power. And unfortunately, there is no very comprehensive approach or holistic approach. We do have to plan and we do have to be forward looking. And I think that the communities too have a role to play here. And I believe that the communities indeed have a lot of possibilities to make it happen, to make the change happen. When I was preparing for this conference with Goda, I remember an example from Helsinki, and my friend, during her maternal leave in Helsinki, she developed a sustainable development plan for one quarter, living quarter. What would be the most appropriate way for the children to play, for the senior citizens to meet, how far or how near the bus stops are. So even on a community level, you can start, as I say, charity begins at home. So you should start from yourself, from your local community. And of course, the local initiatives do not necessarily are heard by those in power or those who take the decisions or make the decisions. I know that some of the audience may have seen the slides because they are so right that you don't necessarily have to reinvent something. So whenever we're talking about sustainable mobility, the largest mistake ever that I see is urban planning in favor of the cars. So first of all, I'm going to plan this, the place or the space for the cars, and then I will plan the bicycle route, bicycle lanes or the pedestrian lanes. But I think that we're starting from the wrong foot. We should start from the people. All the urban planning should start from the people. And we are witnesses of the fact that indeed there is too much focus on the existing data or non-existent data, on the existing undesirable infrastructure, on the willingness to find quick fix solutions or to build some, I don't know, bypass roads because they look nicely on the map. And this is the largest problem. And not only typical of Lithuania, but also to other countries as well. So allow me to emphasize that we should refocus and start planning, urban planning from the people. And so starting from a small courtyard and then moving on and scaling up to the city, to the blocks, how the children are going to play or to go to school, how a person, an elderly, how a disabled or a tourist is going to feel in this city. And therefore, in order to respond to the functions of these individual groups, only then we can expect that our urban planning is going to be a success. Are there many perfect examples of sustainable mobility? There are many urban planners who are trying to forecast the future vision for the cities. So there are indeed a lot of propaganda that cars is an evil or bicycles is a good. I'm not going to go to such extremes. Both things are equally good. My colleague travels from Balsay on a bicycle for 15 kilometers. Another colleague takes an electric car from Balsay, and she is making better use of energy and saves time. So I would not be going into any extremes, what is good, what is bad. And I think I would like to emphasize that people should be given the chance to choose from and to choose what you believe is sustainable. And if we manage to reach the point of deeper discussion, we can start analyzing what are these values for some of you. For some of you, it may be beauty, time saved while traveling, or sustainability. And each of us shall be given the chance to choose from and to enjoy traveling. So I wanted to take some illustrative slides. The first one is in 2011 when I was first going to Seimas, and I was speaking in favor of sustainable mobility, and I was speaking in favor of the methodologies that it is not sufficient to have bicycle lanes, it is not sufficient to buy just a single electricity-driven bus. It is not enough for the city of Marijampolė. And this slide is quite illustrative, and sometimes it is the thing that is the most difficult to understand from New York. And I think that this square was put in order at the end of the last millennium. And there are a number of other examples from Ljubljana, my favorite example, or my favorite Scandinavian city. So we may come across a number of examples where we can indeed distribute the space on an equal footing for all the participants of the mobility. And by doing so, to cut down on car emissions and perhaps saving 1 or 2 lives per year in category D streets, which I don't understand. How can you in the streets which pupils are crossing on the routes from school back to home, there are some busy traffic organized, which is understandable, unfathomable for me. So throughput, of course, is the key word, which some of the urban planner is a favorite one. But a proper street planning also increases better throughput, and therefore transportation of people could be organized in a much better organized ways. And therefore, I wanted to include this illustration to illustrate my point. I wanted to say just a very few words about the Vilnius mobility plan, because the reason why we are meeting today is to cover the topics relevant for this community. Nevertheless, I would like to say a few words about this. I'm going to skip those parts which somewhat visionary and which included a lot of involved many NGOs, people with disabilities, senior population. And by the way, when we were elaborating on these goals and objectives, it was difficult to fight for every single percentage. And therefore, I'm so happy after 3 years when I see in the Facebook when I see the sustainable mobility plan, and it would be one association or another association are quoting this plan, and they expect the city to work according to the plan, then I feel that our work has been meaningful, and those professional communities and citizens communities or special needs communities may not be have not may not have been involved to the full extent, but at least they have been involved, and this hotspot of all the possible tools dedicated or designated to individual groups of the society, hopefully they all boiled down to a comprehensive sustainability plan, including some initiatives for Antakalnis community. Allow me to so I would like to tell somebody when it is time for me to stop, because I can talk for hours on end. So please feel free to cut me short. So what is important to know when speaking about Antakalnis community? What is the current temperature, if I may put it this way? Even though the urban planners really want to take many data, and for me the key data is the structure of the travel. And if with all the possibilities that we have in Antakalnis, there is still a large proportion of travel in cars, and one of my ice hockey commentators said there should be something wrong about it. Something should be done about it. We are missing on some things. And therefore, something is wrong with this last mile solutions if there are so many travels by car. Antakalnis is, of course, specific in that it may sometimes be regarded as an access district or somewhere en route to important other destination points. And in this way, this may account for an increased traffic. We were trying to analyze the cars registered in Antakalnis. So the number of vehicles per 100,000 of inhabitants is, by the way, it is not that, indeed, substantially lower than the overall average for the whole of Vilnius. So I will try to look at the root causes for that. The functional zones, I'm going to skip this slide. No, I'm going to back to say a few words about it. So into this sustainable mobility plan, be it in Vilnius or be it the national sustainability mobility plan, we shall not apply a certain average. Everything happens for a reason, and especially if we're talking about Antakalnis, we have to understand that it is located in the middle of the city when there is indeed a good distribution of functions, including residential, business, or healthcare, or educational facilities, and it is not so easy to accommodate them all into one single solution. So whenever we are just dropping very good examples taken from other, like in Fabioniškės, the situation is different. We do have to appreciate the context of Antakalnis because it is unique. So in this middle zone, the key focus is the public transportation, because this is the zone which we may not be necessarily covering all destinations that we want from where we live to where we need to go. Public transport shall be combined with other modes of transport. And we have tried today with Maria, and even though our innovative apps were suggesting other options, we decided to choose walking by foot, and that is the reason why we were slightly late. So sometimes it is a much better choice to travel 1 or 2 stops to home.
To finish off with the sustainable mobility plan, we would like to show you the plan that we approved in 2018 at the Vilnius City Municipality. In the previous slide, you saw that almost half of the trips used to be carried out by private cars, and 20% were done on foot, and only a small part of trips were covered by bikes. And we had a working group. We worked with various communities, and we outlined certain objectives for 2020. And now we have passed by 2020, and this mobility plan has been implemented. The whole infrastructure has changed, and we can calculate and assess. Well, I cannot say that we can assess everything in monetary terms, but when the sustainable mobility plan was approved, the objectives seemed very non-ambitious. And what can I say? The non-ambitious objectives were not achieved, although we cannot comment that in quantitative terms. And of course, we will be able to reach that by 2030. But we need to have a systemic approach to that. Recently, I was involved in another plan, which was the measurement of the sustainable mobility plan implementation. Those who participated there are aware that there were many packages of measures and various categories and results and other deliverables pre-programmed, and out of the 5 topics and the actions to be evaluated, in total 7% have been implemented. The overall situation we are aspiring for has been improved because the pollution has decreased and children are learning in better conditions. During the development of this program, every 6th educational establishment was in the zone of increased pollution and every 3rd in increased noise. And approximately 15% of population live all the time in the zone of increased noise. And if we look at that through the perspective of the implementation of the plan, we will be able to speak about that later. And today we will be speaking about Antakalnis. And there is one project. City is multimodal, and I participated when creating the concept. I will try to comment on that. Within the scope of this project, we drafted a pilot project, and we have tried to evaluate Antakalnis, considering it from the various perspectives of mobility. And I will give you Antakalnis as an example to demonstrate the ways to change the mode of traveling. And at the same time, this is good methodological basis for us. Of course, we were inspired by the contents of Vilnius Sustainable Development Plan, and we tried to break this down into details. And of course, Antakalnis residents probably know very well the specificities of this district. There are over 14,000 inhabitants and a considerable low number of cars per capita, 347 per 1,000 residents. And public transport is very well developed in Antakalnis district. And when you, of course, start analyzing where you can travel from Antakalnis, then various other issues arise. And if, for instance, need to go to Tuskulėnai Maxima on a number of occasions, then we see that there's no direct connection. And if you think about the 15-minute trip, which requires changing your transport mode 3 times, then you raise a question what mobility is, and you have to make choices. Of course, public transport functions very well. One of the major objectives of the public transport is being reliable and fast. Of course, we do not have lanes in Antakalnis, that's why it's not fast. But business knows very well where they can share their sharing tools. And regarding bicycles, the other speakers will speak about that more, but we have the question, why are there so many people traveling by cars? Because the public transport is not competitive in respect of private cars. Why? Because I live, for instance, in Smėlio Street. But if you live a little bit further, for instance, where Maxima is located and you have a small child, I need to walk to Šilos bus stop quite a long distance, and then I need to change transport modes if I need to reach Tuskulėnai bus stop, and these obstacles are illogical. So from the point of the city, what's wrong about that? Because trolley buses travel very frequently and they are not overcrowded. Why do people use that in a limited way? Because they will either take the passenger elsewhere than they need, or it is difficult to reach the bus stop, or there are other issues. So actually, public transport has to be punctual and reliable. We also need A-lines. Another issue not really suitable for Antakalnis, we have long routes. Buses traveling once per hour, for instance, number 50. And it has a very strange route, many kilometers, change bus stops. There are many details which the consumers can see only judging from their own perspective. And if we consider it from Vilnius perspective, we see a large network and huge prospects. And this is the subject on which our communities could continue speaking. I am not a magician, and I can't tell the community what to do. But the same can be said about traffic jam and peak hours. But I will probably not speak about that anymore. Another objective is cycling lanes. Well, there's a number of cycling lanes. Some of them coincide with pedestrian lanes. Somewhere the lanes are not well protected. And I don't actually like riding a bike. And I was actually smashed at by a bicycle. And actually, one has to feel safe. And safety means not only safety implies not only the distance that you will be traveling till you reach the cycling lane, but also security, safety of my bicycle where I leave it. Because my bike has been stolen 3 times. And when I worked at the municipality, I used to look out of the window to see whether it is still there, because I was afraid not the bicycle being stolen, but the child seat being stolen, because I will need to bring my child back from the kindergarten. Then we have another question: where will I keep my bicycle at home? For instance, maybe I do not take the lift to the 8th floor, and how shall I carry the bicycle up to the 8th floor? There are various issues to be discussed in a narrow circle on which the city cannot have thought about. And these issues are considered from the perspective of the city in one way, and from the perspective of an inhabitant in another way. And we have to adapt it for everyone, the mothers, the elders, the extreme feeling lovers, and so on. A few years ago, for a number of years, I was working with the VGTU secondary school children. And one of the subjects was namely sustainable mobility. The children had offered such solutions which used to make me cry. The children would say, well, all you have to do is to cut out the bushes here, because when I travel, when I ride my bike, I cannot see anything because of these bushes. That's why it's so important to communicate with the community. Now, traffic safety is also very important. And you could remind us what we wanted to show by this slide. I think I have touched upon a few aspects. Regarding traffic safety, well, they have to see the black spots, and for the passengers, safety means more. For instance, whether I will not be attacked, or my child will not be attacked, or I will not be robbed, or so on. Well, these are very important issues on the part of the passenger or pedestrian. And regarding cars, I know that all people choose a car for several certain situations. And if I live in Didžioji Riešė, I will not take the bus to IKEA, because there's no such a bus. And I don't really have the 2 hours for my trip, and I'm going to buy a wardrobe. So actually, the cities, the cars will exist in cities. So what does the city do regarding the car policy and their parking? And because in Antakalnis we have many attraction objects, and the hospital and the college and the VGTU secondary school and so on, there are many attraction objects, and we have been tolerating cars for so many years. And I was showing Maria the house, apartment block where I used to live for 16 years. So actually everyone is very tolerant towards cars, because there's parking available. Parking fees are very low, if any, and this situation should be solved, and I will soon make a proposal what to do. Now, sharing economy. Well, this is a question that has been answered regarding sharing. Well, business raised this question and business has solved it. And to what extent are we going to employ the sharing system for our trips? It's another question. There has been no day whatsoever in my life where I wouldn't advise a young person who would park their scooter in the middle of the sidewalk to think about a blind person. And well, these issues have their advantages and disadvantages. So actually we have various challenges and the situation is existent. And the question is what city policy we are going to have. And we are going to use the micro-mobility systems and the sharing economy.
Then looking at Vilnius sustainable mobility plan, and then on trying to see how can we adapt it to Antakalnis district and to the inpatient clinics in Antakalnis, and by trying to amalgamate all of these individual elements into one single structure, we have finally elaborated on a list of proposals for Antakalnis community. How can we change the mode of transport during your travel? And we believe that it was a rather unprofessional way of dealing with the problem before we analyze how Antakalnis districts could be rearranged in order to improve the mobility options altogether. And just as I remember myself, so many years have been, for so many years we have been talking about A lanes, that in order to reach Antakalnis, you should travel via Žirmūnai, another district, and only then we can expect people to swap their cars into public transport when it is really accessible and convenient. Well, luckily, my kid has enrolled into Čiurlionis art school, and most probably by driving my kid to Čiurlionis art school every day or 2 times per day, I'm going to drop my car somewhere in your courtyards, and there may be other parents who may be desperately looking for any parking lot. So parking spaces and relevant prices or parking fees for parking should also be taken into account. We also have to analyze what are the missing links in between different bicycle lanes. And some material in these slides are somewhat different. And this network of bicycle lanes should be seen as a network, just as it is in the pipeline. All the pipes should connect with each other, and the same holds true about the bicycle lanes. So we have to build bicycle storage sheds, which should be located somewhere distributed conveniently in at a certain frequency next to a very important destination point, to the schools, kindergartens, to shops, etc., etc. So storage capacity for the bicycles has to be analyzed and dealt with. And we could also find other options of sharing and how we can change the travel structure. I am also rather controversial when it comes to bicycle sharing system because we cannot suggest it if there is only one single stop next to St. Peter's and Paul's church. We may not suggest this person to leave to dump the bicycle somewhere next to the church and then take a trolley bus. So before we always have to analyze the demand first before suggesting or before supplying anything. So sometimes there is indeed a mismatch between these two sides. So if we want to build some sheds, bicycle sheds, there should be also a bus stop very much closer to this bicycle storage facility. There are a number of types of solutions which are not that investment intensive, and they could improve the safety, and that would be speed limits, certain measures to reduce transit. I'm going to quote one daughter of the professor who says that sometimes she was very proud herself of traveling at a speed of 90 kilometers per hour because she wanted to take her kid to school. So there shouldn't be a possibility of developing such a speed in within the city. It is too dangerous. So there are many measures like additional traffic lights which have to be put in place, as well as there are a number of other measures, the ones that my colleagues were suggesting. I remember a couple of years ago, I read a book. I believe it was called The Risk, and it was about traffic safety and a number of examples of how Swedes all of a sudden decided to travel on a different side, or they suddenly decided to wear helmets on a bicycle. And I remember from that book about the so-called black spots. They simply cannot be eliminated. They can only be relocated. And unfortunately, this is a sad truth. So whenever you deal with one problem in one area, be it the mentality of the people or some morphological structure of the town or the behavior of drivers or willingness to change something, usually all these attempts sometimes only relocate the black spots. Well, I haven't been stopped, so I've been talking on end. So my presentation is introduction to the fifth presentation, which I expect to hear today, to be made by community members. And I do expect that you have picked up some ideas from my presentation so that we can elaborate in a discussion later. So what are those conclusions that we may make? Antakalnis, to me, is a perfect place to live and to work and to travel, both within Antakalnis and into Antakalnis and en route from or to Antakalnis. And you are also quite a living proof of attractiveness of Antakalnis, because many of you have come on a bicycle. And perhaps sometimes it is easy to take a scooter for the last mile. Or just as one kid mentioned to me that sometimes you need to clear out the hedges in order to improve the visibility for the kids traveling from school. So there are a number of possible measures which are interrelated, and they are related to the solutions at a local level, and they can only be thought out at a local level. Then there's a possibility of swapping or taking a car to travel to IK. That would be much more a natural choice. And I remember when I first picked up this topic as my topic of interest, I believe that now I know a lot, but all of a sudden I have a car myself. But this car was a service car, and all the fuel was free of charge. So every Friday, I decided to make it a different day, to choose a different mode of travel. And I remember at that time there were those mini passenger buses that they had to stop somewhere on the road, and they had to have some cash. So there were a number of those difficulties which have been easily dealt with within the 15 years. And I think that it takes very small steps in order to make a huge difference, so that sustainable mobility is understood not as an somewhat an extremist or a daredevil who is traveling at a devil speed, regardless of everybody around him or her. Sustainable mobility has to ensure four elements, which would be a good reachability of bus stops, a good reachability of all the destination points, be it on foot or on a bicycle, and the universal design. And unfortunately, when taken individually, we may find some solutions, but not all the cities can easily tackle with all the four. You have to, public transport has to be arranged in a way which makes it a user-friendly experience for a person with a disability. People need to have the responsibility of traveling in a wheelchair and taking a public transport bus on the route. So again, a friendly design is indeed very much requires for a lot of solutions, and we have traveled a lot with many people. Well, that was quite a surprise slide for me. So I have traveled a lot with people with various disabilities, disability of moving or disability of visual disability, and we were analyzing the available routes from how friendly they are for people with a certain disabilities. So every single ramp would be, every newly constructed ramp for wheelchair drivers is too high or too steep. So how come that even the new constructions are not user-friendly? So a person in a wheelchair may not travel freely. And I went on an excursion with a person with visual impairment, and this person had a very direct vision without peripheral vision, and indeed we had lots of difficulties on our way to our destination point. So indeed, there is still so much room for improvement when it comes to sustainability in people's mobility in Vilnius. We were looking for possible options in Vilnius. We have a pilot project, and the pictures are from this pilot project. I wanted to illustrate the logics that led us to accept these pilots, and whether this project is going to be a success or not. Is it going to be expensive or cheap? I do expect that we're going to learn some lessons, and we are going to draw the conclusions. Where shall we multiply the multimodal stops? And if they prove to be not successful, then we will analyze further what are the root causes. And I remember one Swede saying, so where shall I start from if sustainable mobility? Well, just do something about it and just try by doing. So learning from your own mistakes or from mistakes of others, but don't sit complacently and don't do anything. And I remember there were some politicians with Kishinev and with Tbilisi, and these people are no longer asking for the Western type of experiences or for those expensive solutions. They have become really clever. They want to learn from our mistakes. They are asking for our mistakes. What lessons have we learned from all the projects, from those expensive projects that we ran in our cities? So these people are really smart. So thank you very much for your patience and so thank you very much once again. And now, if there are no questions, I'm going to take just a gulp of water and invite another speaker, unless there is a pressing issue that some of you may wish to ask. No questions so far, no? So allow me to, are there any questions maybe from our virtual audience? If not, then allow me to introduce the next speaker. Hi, Anton. So now I mute myself, but before I do, I would like to introduce you to my good old friend, Anton Nikitin, and he's the chief engineer from Vilnius city, and he has faced all the arrows of criticism that I had for him. So he's going to comment on all of my criticism from his own perspective as a chief engineer from Vilnius city. Well, we shall see how good I am, because your presentation was indeed a comprehensive one. And sometimes it is difficult to add something in addition in terms of sustainable mobility. And my goal today is as follows. But allow me first to share my screen with you. Hopefully you can see the screen. So we see the screen. Yes, it's fine. We can see. I wanted also to talk about the sustainable mobility in Vilnius, and some of the information is going to replicate or to resonate with what Christina has already mentioned. And there may be some controversial topic. What would be the space in the streets? Of course, we face a lot of, we face some criticism for narrowing down some streets, all for the sake of more space for other modes of transport. And this becomes a heated debate. But allow me to start from the very beginning. Christina mentioned that mobility means the possibility to travel with various modes of transport. Sustainable mobility, to me, means an aspiration to balance travel options within the city so that we can reach our destinations in a fast and more convenient way, regardless of the mode of transport being used. This is why this is our ultimate goal, and why we are seeking this balance. So we have a number of options every day. We can choose from a mode of transport, be it a car or be it a different mode of transport, be it a bicycle, a bus, or a taxi, or a share, or on a car share. And the city also has a number of options on offer as a menu. And in this way, this city and this limited space in between the facades of the building has to be used in the most user-friendly way. Unfortunately, some of the choices inevitably lead to some consequences. And what are these main consequences which happened after a lot of spaces, urban spaces, were planned by having cars in mind and not the people. So what are the challenges? So allow me to start from a negative impact of transport. Christina indeed was very much elaborate on that. So it is noise, it is pollution, it is time lost in traffic jams, poor safety, poor traffic safety. Unfortunately, we have a couple of perished, and there's a couple, roughly 500,000 of Vilniusites who get injured in car accidents. So we do understand that we do understand the pollution, the air pollution, what are the consequences of the air pollution, but just as noise pollution is also a trigger of some diseases. Also, lack of mobility leads to health problems because people don't exercise so much as they should. I remember I discovered once a very interesting and a funny study, by the way. And there was a study of respondents from a couple of towns, and a correlation was discovered how on the ways how they move, and those who choose a different mode of transport, not a car, are 4 kilograms weigh 4 kilograms less than those who spend most of their time while traveling in cars. And money is just as important. A family with a car usually has to spend up to 15% of its household income on vehicle maintenance, compared to only 3% of expenses on transportation options by a family which doesn't have a car. So sometimes, indeed, the difference is indeed huge. In terms of the use of space, I believe this is the most illustrative slide, which shows the average space taken by one mode of transport within a city. And we see how much space is eaten up by a more cumbersome or larger modes of transport. There have been many calculations made how much space is necessary for each single mode of transport. For a car which is being driven at a 50 kilometers per hour speed, it needs 140 square meters in space. A car park needs 20 square meters, public transport 7 square meters. So you see, it is very low compared to private car. A bicycle takes only 5 square meters in space, or 2 square meters for a bicycle, which is in a bicycle storage. So I think this is indeed a very good and illustrative slide, how much space is eaten by individual cars compared to alternatives.
Miesto plėtimą tik gatvių sąskaita.
So we shall not expand the city at the expense of the streets. And in terms of mobility, a growing city, even though it is growing, we still have a lot of residents living somewhere in the suburbs, on the outskirts of the city, and they do need to reach their destination points within the city. They choose buses, or they choose private cars or other modes of transport. So we have roughly 50% of residents who live in a somewhat close distance. Unfortunately, the city is being developed up to the outskirts of the city, which is practically not uncontrollable expansion of the urban space, and the city simply has no power to regulate the urban expansion beyond the currently existing borders. And the infrastructure to be developed for not high rises, but for small or short-sized flat houses is even much more investment intensive. This is a photograph taken from Giedraičiai Street. So we may have a street solely for cars, or we can also allocate enough of space for other modes of transport. Whether indeed this is the most choice, well, this is questionable, time will show, but again, these photographs is a perfect illustration how the very same street may change from the left, from the past to the present. And we see that there are many more safe travel options. Now let us compare the year 2017 versus 2030. The sustainable mobility is an attempt to balance the options. So roughly 30% of all the travels in 9 years' time should account for public transport. Roughly 7-8% travel would be by bicycles, or 4% would be a taxi or a car sharing or other any options. 30% passenger cars, and 29% any travel taken on foot. We wanted to run this study last year, but due to the pandemic, the structure of non-traveling has changed a lot. So we couldn't invest enough money into the study, which may have led us to a completely different set of the findings, given that the people have changed their mobility habits during the pandemic. So we decided to postpone this study once we are back to normal. So this is quite a provocative question that I included on this slide. So what is the relationship between the streets and with the obesity? Louis Mumford has a very famous quote that increase of the traffic lanes in order to fight the traffic jam is somewhat similar to loosening up your belt in case you want to fight your obesity. So when the streets are being expanded under a false assumption that this is going to save us from traffic jams, luckily, there are far less such solutions that are being made in the city, because it is quite obvious that in the long run, any such additional lanes are not going to reduce the traffic jam. And we know it from the global experience that quite frequently, or even I might say absolutely in all cases, if you increase by 1% the throughput, the traffic throughput, or by increasing the number of lanes, it is just the number of cars is also increasing by exactly the same percentage. So this is the rule of proportion, which we unfortunately are not going to luckily solve. So we're trying to balance and to find the space for other various modes of transport. The three photographs taken from different spots of the town, and you see how this place has changed. Once we introduce a larger variety of possible traveling options, including the bicycles and other. So starting from Rūdininkai Street, in which the bicycle lanes were basically made at the expense of the streets that used to be used by the cars in the past. Šimulionys Street was also narrowed down, and now we have additional parking spaces. And Naugarduko Street, which used to be quite a broad street, and that was made narrower in order to accommodate cyclists. And there are some little courtyards which again give additional possibilities. The street diet is made up of various ingredients, and we're trying to apply this diet in various proportions. And well, we can imagine how would a well-balanced breakfast should look like, including protein, a bit of carbohydrates, a bit of fiber. Well, it doesn't necessarily mean that we shall be using only this healthy diet. Sometimes we may detour on once in a while and find other possible alternatives. And allow me to talk about these other alternatives. So what is the city doing with its currently available options? With all these financial possibilities that we have at the moment, and with all the capacities that we have, we are trying to put the passenger in the focus, a person who is traveling on foot. So every year we are renovating a larger proportion of pedestrian lanes compared to the previous years. This year we renovated 30 kilometers. Is it a high figure or a low figure? I think we're going to have it as a normal figure once it more or less doubles. But there is an overall growing trend every year, and it is meant to make traveling on foot much more convenient. In Vilnius, we have 40 routes to be discovered on foot, and 2/3 of the people living in Vilnius note on the improvement in the transportation, and hopefully they're going to discover possibilities of taking a ride. Over the past 5 years, roughly over 60 kilometers of bicycle lanes were laid. More importantly, is that there are no longer lines dividing the passenger lanes and the bicycle lanes, which used to be in the past to divide the passenger lane from the bicycle lane. And you can imagine that in this way we have solved the problem of cyclists. And in this way we have solved many conflict situations that used to be in the past. So we have found a very easy and quite a cheap solution how to delete these dividing lines to accommodate the cyclists and the passengers. Well, somebody suggested that we shall simply use the same tiles for using in the bicycle lanes. Well, and in order to adapt them, that would be again, welding again would be too difficult and complicated task. To paint them, or again, that didn't work either. So luckily, we have got rid of them, and there are only a couple of spaces which are still remaining with a still dividing line between the passenger and the bicycles. Hopefully, soon we're going no longer to see the cyclist lanes on the pedestrian area. The city is investing many more in order to have the racks for bicycle racks, so that you could also leave your bicycle next to your destination or next to your home. It would be next to the schools, kindergartens, or supermarkets. And we do expect that the supermarkets are going to renovate the bicycle racks so that you can leave your bicycle safely and by locking it, so that there should be enough places where to leave your bike. There are a number of pilot projects which we are implementing in a number of districts, namely the pilot projects of bicycle storages. So you could also lock your bicycle and leave it in the locked storage. And Eduardas is also going to talk about the experiences, what would be the best lock for a bicycle and how to lock your bicycle, or what would be the best mode of transport. You shouldn't buy a bicycle that is too expensive, 1,000 euro, which costs 1,000 euro, and then you are really afraid to leave it somewhere out in public space. In terms of the cars, we know it's a good alternative once you really need to travel in a car. If people live in somewhere in remote areas where public transportation network is not yet well developed. Last year, more than 25 kilometers of streets were paved, and this year, this distance in kilometers is not going to be longer, but we simply want to make the works in a more qualitative way. We want to preserve the currently available street pavement so that it lasts longer. So we are introducing a new street standard, and we are describing what would be the desirable width of the street and what should be the we have always look at the street from a holistic point of view. There should be a pedestrian zone, bicycle routes, and then some greeneries, planting the new ones and maintaining the existing greeneries. We have to look and find the parking possibilities, and only then think about the driving lanes. Last year, there was a larger number of parking zones, which makes it easier to find a parking spot. What else do we see? And is a safer street for a safer neighborhood. And of course, we would like to see narrower streets in the residential areas so that they are safer and less noisy, especially the ones the streets which are close to the residential homes, and on top of the noise, we also get some road accidents that are taking place in the residential areas, which could be easily avoided. And they are the result of the human fatal errors. And in these residential areas, there should be narrower streets, and there should be much stricter speed limits, so that we really feel safe. And any inconveniences for the drivers, well, we may always think that without pushing so much of an accelerator, you can travel really conveniently. Narrower streets and lower speeds somehow do not translate into longer journeys. Slower speed means easier regrouping yourself on the road, or seeing each other, and less of putting braking, and therefore you can reduce your speed in a much less fatal with much less fatal consequences. And an average speed in a car is below 35 kilometers within the city. And to have only as much as necessary of a concrete and the streets may be different, but at least from their function, we have to understand that the solutions have to be always ready, that we have to realize whenever we are moving into a slower speed street, there could be a kid running into the football ball because there's simply a residential area, and all the other broader streets of having parking spaces on the street, that they should have some community gardens where they could grow some spices, and the kids could play in this street.
In the city, you can also make use of public transport. The change has been implemented since 2017, and it has been huge because there are over 300 new buses driving along the streets in Vilnius. Beginning with 2016 and 17, the use previously, it used to be that the bus would not come to the bus stop as scheduled because it has broken down or because being so old. But this was just a recent practice. Regarding public transport, the existing lane network is going to expand. The number of kilometers will double during the coming decade by 2030. And we are planning new 9 routes for remote city areas. And as of 2030, there are plans to have 55% of the electrically driven public transport, including faster trolleybuses, which will have the possibility to ride without having connected to the contact network. That will add some flexibility to the trolleybus network. We have also talked more about greener and livelier streets. Last year, we planted over 2,200 trees and 8,000 bushes. These figures are not going to go down, and at the moment, what we are doing and we will be doing more is making free the existing sites for planting trees. And we are going to preserve the existing greenery and finding new sites for new places for new greenery plants.
So that we could also enjoy the scenery while we are en route. And of course, many more spaces for pedestrians, for outdoor cafes. We do understand that if you have a low-speed street, then it is much easier to have a better social contact and to communicate, to speak with your friend is much easier. And the street is much more attractive rather than to sit in an outdoor cafe, which is close to a busy street. And we do understand that the city is for everybody, and we always have to look for the compromises. And we have to look for the ways how to accommodate various interests. Our interest is to improve the current situation and to increase the convenience for cyclists, for public transport users, and to accommodate all these interests. And we see that the human behavior is changing, and so we have run a number of studies on the change of behavior, and apparently some of the people started using electric scooters, a few others started using bicycles, and before the pandemic there was a number of passengers on public transport was increasing. So we do expect that this positive trend will continue. And in many spots, we can use various modes of transport, many more modes of transport than a couple of years ago. And in the central part of the city, there is traffic is being organized in various bypasses, so it is no longer possible to cross the old town just simply by using it as a shortcut option. It is no longer possible because there are detours and there are many one-way lanes in the city center. So only the people who really have some business to do in the old town, they travel to the old town. And of course, some of the drivers may just to show off their newest acquisition, and that is why they decide to travel in the old town to show off to all the elite. And of course, once we introduce these options, we know it's a much better and a cleaner urban environment and more attractive living conditions. So to sum up my speech, if we're planning a town having transportation in mind, we can only have more transport and more cars. But if instead we choose to plan the city having people in mind, then there will be many more space for the people and for their activities and for enjoying urban life. And some of the towns decided to completely become car-free old towns, and the people suddenly started to rediscover the old town. They enjoy traveling by foot, and it has become a completely different mode of transport chosen by people. And if there are many people traveling on this street, there are streets are relived, and this is it from my side. And I do hope that I have successfully showed the overall perspective of the city. So are there any questions from the audience? And I would be gladly to answer them.
Thank you. As far as I can see, internauts have no question, and I'll call you. And I see that the audience has listened to all your material. If you can stay with us, please do. And if you can't, thank you very much. And I see that we have another speaker connected. The Swedish Cycling Cities Association representative, Emil Rensvala, and he will chair best practices from Sweden and elsewhere. So I look forward to hearing you, Emil. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Kristina and Anton, for your presentations. It's great to see the development in Lithuania and in Vilnius. And I'm pleased to be part of this event. So I will try to share my screen now. I hope that you can see the screen. Okay, so my name is Emil Rensvala. I am the executive officer of Svenska Cykelstäder, Swedish Cycling Cities. We are an NGO, a non-governmental organization, which consists of municipalities and regions who want to increase cycling. And I'm going to talk to you today about some of the good things that are happening in Sweden, like this bridge in Sölvesborg, which is one of Europe's longest bicycle and pedestrian bridges. And I will speak some of Slussen in Stockholm, which is Sweden's busiest bicycle route. Cycling has been growing very much, and in some points, like at this location, the infrastructure hasn't been ready for the the big development of increased cycling. But first, some basic facts. The cycling share in Sweden is 11% of all journeys take place on bicycle. The city with the highest bicycle share is Lund, which has a 42% bicycle share. If you ask the cyclists, the best ranked city is Örebro. And the city which is best in bicycle promotion and investments is Uppsala. And we know that the potential for cycling is huge in Sweden. Just looking at where people live, 96% live within a 20-minute bicycle distance from a primary school and 93% from a grocery store. And also a lot of people can reach a healthcare center, 85% within a 20-minute bicycle ride. And the share of the regional population who could cycle to work or education under 15 minutes is also very huge, as you can see in this figure. In Stockholm, 46% could ride to work in under 15 minutes. So we have a big potential for increasing cycling. I want to ask you questions today rather than providing you with answers. So my first question to you all to think about is, what would make people in your city or region or country use the bicycle more often? There was a time in Sweden, in Stockholm, as you see here, and in most European cities where everybody rode a bicycle. It was a natural and primary mode of transport for a majority of the people. In this time in Stockholm, in the 1930s and 40s, 7 out of 10 vehicles was a bicycle. And you would see cargo bikes parked in each and every courtyard. How would messengers go about? Well, of course, they rode a bicycle, and they had trailers, they had rat cages, and they even had Villainous already in 1943. And the society was a society based around the bicycle. Everybody used a bicycle. It was what was expected of people, until politicians and engineers decided to stop this development. They wanted to get rid of the physical effort that people need to put on when they ride a bicycle, and they wanted to liberate the working classes from using their body. And they formulated this grand vision that the future consists of self-driving cars, and that will be great, they said at the time. Sweden was not bombed during the World War II, but we instead destroyed our own cities by ourselves in the 1950s and onwards to make place for the car. So we tore down a lot of our inner cities to make room for a car-oriented development. And this policy was very successful. Cycling, as you can see in this graph, decreased very rapidly and had almost disappeared in the 1970s. This graph shows a place in Stockholm and the percentage of bicycles traveling through that place. And what had been the very logical foundation of our cities, namely that when you want to cross the street, you go directly from A to B. That has been the foundation how to move in cities for 10,000 years. That was replaced by an altogether different logic, where you always have to take a detour when you want to cross a street or go somewhere in the city. And we know that this had very big impacts on us, on our health, and on our environment. The children today are no longer as physically active as they used to be. And some research suggests that the people who grow up today will be the first generation in modern time to have a shorter mean lifespan than their parents. So a lot of people will live shorter lives because of poor health. And cycling can be very effective in increasing health. Only by riding 50 minutes to work and 50 minutes home from work, 5 days a week, an adult which is not physically active can up to half reduce the risk of several welfare diseases. And we also know now that the benefits of cycling by far outweighs the risks. This is a meta-study which was performed when they look at the benefits of cycling and the risks and costs of cycling. And it turns out that even though it can be dangerous, the health effects are much larger than the potential risks. My second question to you is, do your policies encourage cycling in relation to other modes of transport? I think that's a key question if you want to increase cycling. Is it more attractive or less attractive than, say, the car? This is the freedom machine that changed my life. I grew up in the suburbs outside of Stockholm. My parents would drive me, or I would take the bus, and it would be far from everything, until I became a student and I bought this secondhand bicycle, and suddenly I can go anywhere. It gave me so much freedom, and I realized that this has a huge potential for increasing our mobility in cities. And now this is my wife and my daughter in our cargo bike, and we don't own a car. We have a second child expected in September, and we have no plans on buying a car. And increasingly, families in Sweden don't feel the need to buy a car. They can get by with a bicycle and public transport. And we can go on vacation together. We can go shopping, grocery shopping. But the problem is that the environment that was created in the 1900s is not always good for us who want to ride a bicycle. And this is sort of the disclaimer, don't try this at home. Because Sweden, there are a lot of good things happening, but also a lot of bad things. And we have become experts in putting up posts in the cycling paths. And we have become so good at this. And this is really a problem that needs careful attention at the national level in Sweden. What the national level in Sweden, the government, also don't like to pay for is cycling infrastructure. In this graph, you can see the total pile of money in the national plan in the graph most to the left. And you see the cycling total to the right. And it's only 1% that the government spends on cycling infrastructure in relation to other modes of transport. This is not good enough. And with this line of development, it will take decades before we have a good and well taken care of cycling network throughout entire Sweden. The state also loses some 45 billion Swedish crowns every year in funding people to drive their car to work. Our policies are really subsidizing car use, and that needs to be taken care of. We want people to ride a bicycle more often. But we, as an NGO, has also had advocacy successes. Recently, the parliament stated that we need to modernize road legislation in Sweden, which in a weird way says that it's not possible for the state to build bicycle routes close to railroad tracks. So this is not a picture from Sweden. That would be illegal in Sweden. This is a picture from Germany. So this is why we want this changed. We've also been successful in having bicycle streets in our legislation, which was introduced this autumn, a year ago. And then we also have a pool of state funding for municipal cycling infrastructure, where municipalities can apply for national funds for example, building a bicycle garage, as here in the city of Umeå. My third question is, do you evaluate if your measures lead to increased cycling or not? I wrote this question before the other presentations, and it seems like you do and that you are successful. But I will show some good examples also from Sweden. The city of Linköping has had an increase of cycling from 24% to 28% over 4 years. And I typed in Google Maps to get from one destination in the city to another by a car. And I have to take this detour, which is a common planning system in the Netherlands, a circulation plan. So riding a bicycle becomes much more faster than driving a car. In Linköping, we also see that the cargo firms, they perceive that it's much faster to drive goods on bicycles rather than on pickup trucks. The city of Jönköping has been trying very hard to get their employees, their state employees, the municipal employees, to ride a bicycle to work. And we can also see that they have been successful in increasing the number of municipal employees who ride to work. They have been providing their employees with discounted bicycles. The city of Karlstad is investing very much in making it possible to ride a bicycle throughout the year. They've also been successful in increasing cycling with a rise from 15 to 19% in 4 years. The city of Sundbyberg is working a lot with parking, and they have this municipal policy that states what quality the bicycle parkings in new housing development should have. And they also see an increase in cycling. The city of Malmö has been investing a lot in safe crossings. They saw an increase of 5% in the last non-pandemic year. Helsingborg saw an increase of 7% in cycling in the last pandemic-free year, and they have been investing a lot in their inner city bicycle network, making it wider and less bumpy and so on, making it have more comfort. The city of Gothenburg have seen an increase in cycling as well. They have been investing a lot in what they call commuter cycling paths throughout the city. The city of Växjö is the city which invests the most in soft measures. For example, they have this so-called library where you can rent a cargo bike, and they have seen an increase in cycling as well. And finally, Stockholm, which has doubled cycling in the last 15 years. You see on this picture the third generation bicycle infrastructure in Stockholm, a bicycle path where you can ride four cyclists abreast. And the problem now in Stockholm is that we start to see congestion on the cycling paths. They are simply too narrow and they need to be widened even further. This is another point in the central city, and we see that in crossings there's often a huge queue that's piling up to cross the road. They have made mistakes. This was the first generation bicycle infrastructure in Stockholm, which they built some 20-30 years ago, and this is not a safe place for children to ride. So it was a good first step, but now the city of Stockholm see that this needs to change in order to have all groups dare to ride a bicycle. On this picture, you see the third generation bicycle infrastructure to the left and the second generation bicycle infrastructure to the right. People used to ride to the right, but it became too narrow. So some 8 years ago, they took one motor path and gave it to cyclists, and the same thing on the other side of the road. And this is a development which has been going on in more places. So now they try to build good quality cycling infrastructure. They build one-way bicycle infrastructure and two-way at different locations, what suits best. And we see that this policy has been very successful. I showed you the black and white picture in the beginning, where there was a lot of cyclists in the 1940s in Stockholm. This is almost the same place today, before the pandemic. And this queue would, if all these people in the queue would ride a car, this long queue would be taken, take place on the entire island of Södermalm, where this is in central Stockholm. So we would have so much congestion if all these people chose to ride a bicycle or a car. And we can create a great European bicycle-friendly future for ourselves and our children. And I thank you for inviting me today and making that possible. Thank you very much.
Ar turim klausimų iš auditorijos arba iš interneto?
Turim.
Are there any questions from the audience or from the internet? How much is spent on average on a cyclist from the national budget? In the Netherlands, it is €30 per cyclist spent in the Netherlands. And how much do you spend in Sweden per cyclist? Do you have the statistics?
I'm afraid I don't, but I will look it up.
Kaip?
Sako, nežino pasitikslins.
O dar? Gal dar turim klausimų?
Any more questions?
Tai gal tuo tarpu, kol sugalvosim klausimų,
So if there are no any further questions, we would like to thank Emil. And hopefully you're going to stay with us for longer. Now we're going to have a practical presentation. And Leonardas, I have introduced already him in the very beginning. He's a very active and a very highly initiative person. And he's an active cyclist himself. So I would like to ask Eduardas Kriščiūnas to take the floor. So everybody was telling what the city could do, and I know that the city is not doing basically its job, that Vilnius was supposed to have over 200 of various bicycle lanes, and instead we only have 30 kilometers. So I might say what we can do ourselves to make our life easier, and so that a bicycle becomes a new normal. Well, first of all, nothing is going to change if you believe that you have to carry your bike to home and that the bicycle has to be a very light one, because the lighter it is, the more expensive it is going to be and the more lucrative for the thieves. If you're going to a shop within 1 kilometer or 2 kilometers distance, it is much easier to take a bike to do that. I always take a bike to go to a shop, and I'm somewhere on the verge of, shall I go on foot or shall I take a bike? If I had to take my bike from the 5th floor, I would definitely go on foot. But since I no longer do it, I keep my bike below my balcony and have a rack. I always drive or I always ride on a bike to my shop. I could take my bike to a shop which is 1 kilometer from my home or 2 kilometers from home. That doesn't really make any difference. So there are certain things which need to be to make it easier for you to use a bicycle instead of your shoes. A bike shall not be expensive, that you shouldn't care too much if suddenly it is stolen. Well, the bicycle should look like the next one, that its neighbor is much more expensive, and it always helps you much at comfort. If there's some drug addict who just needs a last dose, he or she is going to steal the most expensive or the most luxurious bike. And what I did with my bike, I painted it on purpose to look a little bit outdated, because for the thieves, what matters is the looks. And there may be some doubts for a thief whether this bike is functioning or not. But all the main parts are different. The first thing that I learned back in 2007, this is this part that I'm showing with my feet, which basically you can now find it in Lithuania. So you can simply extend this rubber protector, and this little thing indeed changes the situation so much better. And when I understood that I can travel with my shoes clean by riding on a bike rather than taking on foot, I really was surprised that it may happen. That with this protector, which doesn't seem to be very critical, but with a longer protector, you are protecting your shoes and you are also protecting the chain. And it was especially relevant for me in the past so that I can easily switch the gear very easily and that my chain is protected, so I don't have to oil it too frequent. And that was my hugest discovery. The second thing would be related to safety. A bike has to be made ready to ride, be it day, be it night. And we can also find a cheaper thing which you can put on a tire, but the best thing is dynamo and an automatic light mechanism. And yet again, there is a generator which immediately activates the lights. And depending on the dusk, be it daylight or be it dusk, the lights are switching off or on automatically. So you don't need to bother anymore because the lights are working automatically. So this is a generator that they put on the wheel. And the second thing, and in Lithuania, it is a mandatory thing to be always with the lights, but in a normal world, where nobody is asking for the lights in the daylight, then there is this front light, which is working from the generator, and it also has a certain sensor, a light sensor, which again is getting activated automatically. And if the sensor feels that it is too dark, then the lights are switching on automatically. And the back torch is also linked with the front torch. And from a safety point of view, you always know that the things are going to work for you. So I have covered the safety issues. What is important for the city itself? I remember I used to have those external gear box. And now the first thing I would do, I would choose it into the internal gearbox. You can never protect your bicycle if you're using the external gearbox. And if you have this internal gearbox, then it is protected. And you also have to roll up your trousers in order not to get dirt on your trousers. So we have here the chain, which is locked in. So as soon as I start upgrading my bicycle, I would start from this. First of all, the protection of the chain. All your clothes stay clean, and you may even ride in a dress even. And another thing which is very much important to the central lock system, that you don't need to lock all the doors. So what was a discovery for me is that there is this lock of the back wheel. And if you want really to run really fast, very quickly, and if you don't expect any thief to be coming by, you simply lock the back wheel, and then you take the key, and you simply see that this bike can no longer be ridden. And of course, the thief may carry it on the shoulders, but if suddenly you just ride to some point, and the thief, of course, may look around and see which of the bicycles is the easiest to steal, and the thief may never think about such a lock. And if the bicycle is not moving, then the thief is not going to take this bike. So within this margin of half an hour, I believe that the thief is going to find a much easier catch than your bike. And another important thing is never use well, those drug addicts, almost all drug addicts are the ones which were having a certain cable, with a certain cable. So the first thing that these thieves would look at would be what would be the lock system or the lock, and then they would look around, and since there were no video, and since the thieves noted that it was not a cable, whereas my son's bicycle was on a cable, locked on a cable, that was a bad thing. So it is not so much the value of a bicycle. The thieves don't even see what kind of a bicycle they're stealing. For them, it is most important how quickly they can steal the thing without being unnoticed. So before that, I used to use a cable because I believe it was so convenient and I could easily stretch it as much as needed. And it's so much trouble with the chain. But after I bought this cable, I realized how stupid I was. It is so easy. You come to the bike and just a matter of seconds, and then you lock it. And there is a pole, you can lock it next to the pole. And if you're traveling with your family, you don't even have any lock. You simply take a couple of bikes and then use this cable on all the 3 or 4 bicycles. And you don't need any even pole to lock your bicycle to, because a single thief is not going to steal 4 bikes in one go. So you should bear it in mind. It is so easy to realize and to lock your bike. And indeed, it's indeed a game changer. And you understand that it is no necessary to think about how safe your bike is. You just come and you unlock it, and it's super easy. What else is important? Another important thing is to have this support for the bicycle. And of course, it is much more convenient to have it as a support. And it is very interesting because you can put your bicycle wherever you want. You don't need any pole. And it's quite a specific support. And this is a support taken from a cargo bicycle. As you can see, it is not going to be rolled over by any strong wind. So it's a very broad support. And the wind is not going to capsize it. Another important thing is that people sometimes tend to carry their things in a backpack. But if they are traveling on long distances, then your bags get sweaty. So another good thing is to have a certain storage boot on your bike. And that could be an easily detachable storage. And even if I'm taking some lighter things, I decide to take this lighter boot. And it is very convenient. And it is much more convenient to have it on a two-sided. Because if it is one-sided, then its internal side would be dirty. It is going to be dirty. And then you have to struggle how to carry it on. And if you take it as a two-sided boot or two-sided bag, then all the dirty things would stay in between. And of course, front torch, back torch. Well, there is some storage space here as well. It's very good to have pump and very expensive tires. And especially if you are also riding your bike in winter. And it is such an uncomfortable thing to change your tires in winter time. So I would choose the best index for tire as winter-proof tires for my bicycles. And if you're only riding in a horizontal space, or if you're participating in a race, then you shouldn't be too much caring about the weight. And therefore, I may be carrying a thing for a year, and quite a difficult thing, because these are the repair the repair utensils. And horn is very important. And they have a horn with a SpongeBob, and everybody's happy because the father is really a merry one. And to make them even happier, whenever you're taking your bike to a ride into the nature, you usually ride one after one. And usually the father who is driving the first and the children are leading, then they're taking all the dirt after your wheels. And therefore, I decided to prevent my kids from my own dirt. So again, I chose a very long protector. And this is as a kind of courtesy for all your fellow passengers who are riding behind you. It is no nice for your fellow traveler to take all your dirt. So at least it would be socially responsible to have a long protector both at front or at the back. So I think I have covered all the basics. Or is there anything that I have left out? And my seat was broken, so I had to use this insulation tape, and sometimes I also use it as a marker, especially if I leave my bike in a storage. In order to discover my bike very quickly, I would tape it with some bright color. Any questions? I learned really a lot. Oh, by the way, I believe that you're not going to discover such cable type of locks in Lithuania. Well, I remember how many times I have requested. And the thing, a funny thing I noticed in Italy, people would ride next to the shop, and then they would lock their bike, and they would lock the front wheel with some strange things. And I was really curious why they were not using the cable lock. And they say, well, we don't get it. And this is a tradition. And this is a tradition, an Italian tradition, to use very funny locks. And most probably the smart peoples would always be learning from the mistakes of others. So I would, the price of such a cable lock would be starting from €7 per piece. So that would be 7 or 8 euro, and then this chain, and depending on the length of the chain, it would be more expensive. Some of the locks would not have the possibility to add the chain, and it is connected to the bike, and only one end goes to this lock. And when you buy, you should check that these endpoints coincide, because they have to be matching. Or sometimes the producers may mention with which one or other piece is compatible or not. So this is it, what you need in order to have a normal bike, and without ever having to worry that it may be stolen, and without ever having to worry to take it to the 5th or 6th floor. I forgotten one point. There is no chance of to forget the key, and you shall not forget the key, and lock your key, and not to leave the key. And because the thief may take the key and leave the bike, and you will have to carry your bike with you. And that's it. Somebody is commenting in the background, not into the microphone. We apologize. We do not hear. So why did you install a bicycle rack in your yard? Well, I started using my, first of all, I built a rack when I saw that those bicycles of my neighbors would be left in very funny places. And I understood that it is quite realistic to keep your bicycles on the street and nobody stole them. And instead, I decided to install a rack behind my balcony. Especially, it would be good to ask Inton, the chief urban engineer, initiate instead of building some sort of funny named intermodal bicycle storages for 8 bicycles, where there are only 14,000 of inhabitants in this district. It would be much more realistic if these racks were built in front of your windows, somewhere next to your balcony, where you can see. And I know at least one member of the community which wanted to use this intermodal storage in order to save the travel of taking the bike into the cellar. And she decided to use the intermodal storage. And she couldn't do it in 3 times. The first time she failed because there was some funny registration failure. And the third time, she understood that there was only a space for her on the 2nd floor. There was some space left for scooters on the 1st floor and the 2nd floor, which you have to lift your bike onto the 2nd floor. And I was really surprised And it turns out that it is quite a challenge. And when I saw the Swedes promoting bicycle storages with vertically standing bicycles, you know what I said when I thought this is a complete bullshit. I remember there was the Think Parkis, there were very there is one single thing. You can easily break your protector by using this rack produced in Lithuania. It is good if you're not taking an urban bicycle, which is ultra light, which doesn't have any protectors, and therefore all these vertical storage racks are basically the facilities which break the bicycles. So I think we shouldn't be using this as a possibility. So it's not worth it to leave your bike on a second floor. There is no difference then. You can also easily take it to the fifth floor. We didn't hear the comments. Oh, well, the way we have to understand that this bicycle should be visible, and if the town analyze the video surveillance, and they don't expect that these video surveillance cameras wouldn't be any helpful because drug addicts know how to behave. But at least maybe it would be easier for the police to identify these suspects. And if the municipality did this, that would be a good sign that the municipality cares about the people, that instead of promoting the sustainable mobility plan, we used to be the bicycle lanes plan, which has never been put in practice. So at least you should put up those surveillance cameras, which would make people feel much safer, and maybe it would be easier and much cheaper for the municipality to buy a video surveillance camera or even a mock camera. Nobody knows. It doesn't have to be real. You mentioned also that I was participating in one of those hackathon of the Baltic countries, and the youth were building a prototype which would be tables in public spaces where you can ride into with your bike, and then you can, like a drive-in, so an alternative to the drive-in in a car, to a ride-in on a bike. So there would be benches next to the bicycle lane. There's an integrated bench where you can simply ride in between. Well, why should you invent the wheel? All you need is to have a pole where you can leave your bicycle to support. And well, I think it's going too much. And then this bench is even more expensive than the two bicycles. It costs more than two bicycles. And a good example would be in the Netherlands, who say we're not going to build electric pumps on the streets, and we know that it is much too expensive, because every single neighbor can borrow a pump, a wheel pump, and that is the easiest way. Certain things have to be used realistically, and they have to be easy to maintain and to repair, and they do not need to be electric pumps. And a good thing that we see that one company donated bicycle pumps which are even working, because I have never come across a working or a functioning bicycle pump in Denmark, because they are investing even fewer than the Swedes. Unfortunately, the Swedish government is investing less than 1 cent per inhabitant in a year, and the main spending on the bicycles would be coming from the municipal funding. So most probably there is not enough fund for electric pumps. So I think that in Lithuania, at least Vilnius has spent definitely much more than 1 cent per cyclist or per inhabitant. So municipalities do spend a lot in Sweden, but the state per se only sends 7 thousandths of a euro. And I think that Lithuania may look similar, but Sweden, but there are some, well, the cities in Sweden and in Lithuania are not so easily comparable. According to our national road program of Lithuania, which is being elaborated by the Ministry of Transport. They are planning to increase the bicycle lanes next to the national routes.
Tikslas per 10 metų 20% padidinti skaičių, kuris praktiškai yra lygus nuliui.
There will be common and cycling lanes, and I would also like to discuss on that in different surroundings. To what extent is it worthwhile having cycling lanes at the national roads? And I can feel the nice aroma of our biscuits, and I would like to thank Eduardas and Antonas, and I would like to thank Emil from Stockholm Cycling Association. I would like to thank Goda for hosting us, our partners, and the viewers. Goodbye.